AskReddit by the legendary Taco. Lawyers of Reddit, what is a detail that your client failed to bring up to you that completely lost you the case? Opposing counsel, isn't it true you hit victim in the face with a brick? Client, no. Marcus hit him with a brick. I hit him in the back with a piece of wood. He'd sent a photo of his wife's beaten face to his wife with a message saying something along the lines of this: "Do you want this to happen again?" He came across very well and caught up to that point, but his mask slipped when that came out. Yay, sounds like someone I know. He can keep the mask on for a while, but it starts to slip when his perceived world isn't reality. A buddy of mine case as a public defender. A gal was busted on drug charges and told him she didn't have any drugs on her when they arrested her. He thought, okay, we'll use that. Turns out, she didn't have any drugs on her when they arrested her because she just sold them to an undercover cop. Technically she didn't have any drugs in her, lol. My house was robbed. In addition to all the stuff the thief took, he also stole a bunch of my suits and all of my neckties. I had a big collection, like 100 or so. However, the thief left fingerprints on a hard plastic box that I kept spare change in. Fast forward 3 months, the thief is caught in the act of robbing another house in the same neighborhood. Same detectives on my case and this new theft. They fingerprint the guy and the fingerprints match the ones from my house. At the thief's arraignment, I see him stroll in wearing my suit and my tie. I tell the district attorney, he says there's really no way to prove it. However, the tie he chose to wear was a one-of-kind street map of San Francisco and I still had all the documentation to prove it. The district attorney's eyes widen and he informs the judge. The judge has the thief placed under arrest again for possession of stolen pee. I hate that this happened to you, but I love this story, hahaha. Custody case. Client failed to tell me he was previously convicted of felony child abuse for breaking 16 bones in an infant's body. Sometimes I wish we could stone people. Friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically this guy took an AC unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation, no jail time. The judge is all ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he would like to say. The defendant responds, "Yeah, I don't know why they charging me with assault, I never touched her. I just threw an AC at her." This is bullshit. Judge rescinded plea deal because of defendant's attitude, lack of remorse, went to trial and got a year in jail. The idea of having an AC unit thrown at me is honestly terrifying. Client said his ex owed him a lot of money and that she was trying to get out of paying him back by getting a protective order against him. Seemed reasonable, so I took his case. At the hearing it came out that they were never a couple, that he was sending sex toys to her residence on a weekly basis and that she never asked for the thousands of dollars he gave her over the years. Stripper. We lost. He got laughed out of court and he learned a valuable lesson. Tell your lawyer the good and the bad stuff before trial. There's so many. My dude in a custody battle where the opposing party claims he has a drinking problem and he denies it 1000%. Even after the real talk I have with him asking him to not hide shit from me and to be honest, we go into court and at cross-examination the opposing party provides video evidence of him finishing work, driving to an abandoned parking lot to drink a few tall boys and then going to pick up his kid from school. Every single access visit. He not only didn't tell me that, he forgot to mention that his ex's brother owns the private investigator firm. Fucking idiot. That he filmed his offenses for his YouTube channel. The cops didn't even know. A witness brought it up on day 3 of the trial. It was a nice quick change of plea that afternoon. So you're saying, it's just a prank, bro, isn't a valid legal defense? Employment case. We got to the deposition of my client and all set up. The first question is, please state your name. The client looks at me and says, can we take a break? We do, and she pulls me out in the hall to tell me she's lied to me about her identity. She's apparently a serial fraudster and has changed identity 7 times since the 90s. She apparently thought the other returners had somehow figured it out, and that's why they asked the question. Case as a paralegal. Negligence case. Client argued that a lack of street lights and a cyclist he couldn't see was responsible for him hitting a wire pole. Upon discovery, the first respondent's report indicated that they found the driver in the driver's seat, pants down, with porn playing on the phone. Wasn't difficult to figure out who was negligent at that point. Your Honor, if the cable repairman had simply fixed the cable in accordance with professional standard practices, my client would have had no other recourse but to keep his ostrich in the corral on the evening in question. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations, etc. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. Swore up and down he'd never filed before. You can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He'd personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered at all. What was he in for? If he was telling the truth that he was completing all of those programs and not getting written up for anything, was there something to do with the severity of his crime that made the courts reticent to grant his request? I heard of a guy trying to appeal his disability benefit being revoked. He was supposedly a paraplegic, but the opposition had over 10 minutes of video footage of him walking, running and even jumping over a fence. After the 1-minute mark, the judge said, "Okay, I've seen enough. Please leave." Lived in country, had neighbor who spent like 15 years fighting for disability, his back actually was wrecked. He finally gets it and the initial payment is for the previous 15 years worth. Few weeks later neighbor sent in videos of him remodeling his house with the money. He didn't lose the disability. Judge was sympathetic to the argument that he could work for a day here and there, but was in the bed for the next 2 weeks. Credit card theft fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the late 80s, I was trying this guy on a CC case and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her how could she be so sure it was my client. She looked at my client who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable and said, "Because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him." The jury convicted him and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. Not one of my finer moments, but a similar story. I was returning home from a business trip to Los Angeles and going through customs I was asked if I had any purchases to declare, which I had stated on my customs form $0 in purchases. The customs agent asked me again and I confirmed $0, and then they pointed out the Universal Studios Hollywood t-shirt I was wearing. I then confirmed the $20 in goods to import. They let me go without further questions as I was obviously not a criminal mastermind. My father is a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids and so on. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she is bending over trying to reach it from her chair, but pen was too far away. So she stands up and bends over and picks it up and goes back to her seat as if nothing is out of the ordinary. My dad is just looking at her and she snaps at my dad and goes, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was okay and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her and she then loudly started complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her. Lol. She snapped at the judge and said, "What are you staring at?" Now you put it that way, maybe I did hit the car. Simple is good. Just now saw a post of a guy whose defendant claimed that the parked cars were at fault that he hit them. Or maybe some other drivers, or something else. Definitely not him, even though it's clear on a CCTV, as day, that he just didn't watch the road and scraped 3 cars. Still tried lifting the blame blindly. Some people are just sure that everything in the world is to blame. That's not them. I was about to complete a land transaction which required my client to have built a road. Indeed, the entire point of the transfer was the road. My client, as I call him prior to completion, turns out didn't build the road. I had a client who, despite being a large man, had been domestically abused by his much smaller wife throughout their marriage. After the divorce, she turned her anger on their son. He ran away one day to live with his dad, and we filed to restrict her parenting time and for a permanent modification. At the permanent hearing, she denied being abusive to the child or my client in front of the child, said she never threatened anyone ever, and that she never made disparaging remarks about my client in front of their son. What she didn't know, and therefore hadn't told her attorney, is that he had recorded multiple instances of her abuse. So I called my client back up for rebuttal and played an audio recording of her screaming at my client, threatening to break his face in, and calling him a loser, all while the child could be heard in the background begging her to stop. I looked over at the other attorney and she had her face in her hands. We won. Deleted. I really don't want to believe anyone is that stupid. Employment law matter. He claimed to have been unfairly dismissed over bogus performance management. The real reason, he organized via Craigslist to have someone collect a box of his cum from a children's playground. There were explicit messages from him asking what they did with it, and whether they rubbed it all over themselves. The employer provided us the messages. Edit. He was doing this on company time. Deleted. Deleted. What kind of law do you do now? Not mine, but went to court over a ticket. Lady was in front of me for DUI and hit and run. The judge assigns a lawyer for her since she was so shook she quit her job. The judge asked the prosecuting attorney for details on the case. She legit says, "You mean that car I hit while I was intoxicated?" The judge stops, takes his glasses off and says, "Everything is recorded in this courtroom. I told you not to talk to anyone about your case except the attorney that I assigned for you." You could tell he was ready to walk out of the room with the level of stupidity this lady showed. Sounds like my mom. She's going through a lawsuit with her hoe, and in her head she just thinks that she can just explain everything away, and everyone will be on her side. She's met with her lawyer twice already and he keeps telling her stick to facts only, and her response is always, "Well, I have to explain this." Or, "But this is what I think and feel." If she ever gets arrested, she will never remain silent. I had to go to court for child support and she wrote a 3-page letter to the judge about why my ex was garbage and fully expected me to get up in court and read it. I had a prosecutor representing the enforcement agency that did all the talking. UK, not a lawyer as such, but a planning consultant. Client signed sworn affidavit stating he'd been running a truck park business for over 10 years on a piece of land. After 10 years, a use becomes immune from legal action. The counsel checked Google Maps and saw immediately he lied, had only ran the business for 7 years. He had committed a criminal offense by submitting a false sworn affidavit. Plonker. Sounds like something typical of owners of truck parks, etc. My dad was for many years involved in ensuring these kind of people waste disposal firms etc. operate in compliance with environmental law. He had no end of tales about how impossible they were to work with, even when they weren't in the wrong. It's a shady field of business. When I was an intern at court, I was watching a battery trial with another intern. The defendant was asked if he can remember how many people were present when he beat up the other guy. He then points at my fellow intern and says rather loudly, "She was there but she didn't see anything. Don't trust her." Of course she wasn't there and the defendant was found guilty. A defendant was written a cell phone ticket while driving and defended himself. "Your Honor, I was not using a smartphone while driving. I was actually using a flip phone." Guilty. So as a technicality, if it stated on the ticket that he was using a smartphone and he was able to prove he didn't own a smartphone, without saying he was using one at the time, would that get him off? Edit. My intention with this would be hoping the defendant wouldn't be dumb enough to then say it is this instead, but rather just say no, I do not own a smartphone, so I could not have been operating one while driving. A truthful and whole statement under oath. I'd assume any good lawyer would then press for further details and have it collapse, but I'm also spending my evening on Reddit, so what do I know? Not strictly a court case, but boneheaded stupidity. A number of people have given a false name to police to avoid an arrest warrant, but got arrested when the false name matched someone with an outstanding arrest warrant. https://lowering-theba.net/202/02/alias-warrant.html. Unfair dismissal case. The client claimed to have been dismissed without reason or following procedure. After we had started the case, it comes out that not only was he given 3 written warnings, but he was also called in for a disciplinary hearing before his dismissal. Don't lie to your lawyer. Similar to a doctor, I feel like not telling your lawyer everything can just hurt you. Estate matter. Client neglected to tell me he had 4 children from a previous marriage. Guess who showed up to challenge the will after he died? They lost, but I would have drafted his will differently had I known. Deleted. Because with drink driving, the driver is just a danger. They could get into an accident, they could hit another car, they could kill someone. But then they could also just hit a single road sign and die on impact, not hurting anyone else, and the only property damage is one sign. And depending on the individual's ability to tolerate alcohol, sometimes the chances of an accident are greatly increased or greatly reduced. But leaving the scene of a crime, they have already hurt someone, they have already damaged property. They are no longer a danger, they have actually done it. Not me, but my dad represented a guy in a civil case. He doesn't normally do criminal law, but in this instance the question of a forged signature came up, and his client lied, saying he didn't forge it. My dad was very clear in explaining that admitting to him wouldn't land him in jail, it would just allow him to build a better defense, but he still denied forgery, and so my dad rolled with it. He said his case was completely cut up once it came out that yes, in fact, his client did forge the signature. And X200B. Guys and gals, your lawyers aren't a snitch, they're trying to get you the best possible result. Always be honest to your lawyer. Deleted. 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 I work for an insurance company. A guy sued one of our insureds for, among other things, loss of consortium, which can encompass many things but namely the ability to have sex with your spouse. We had gotten surveillance on the guy and had video of him having sex in a car with a woman other than his wife. For whatever reason his attorney took it to trial anyway. He continued to deny the ability to have sex. The video was played for the jury and the guy's wife who was at the trial. He lost the trial and his wife. Deleted. That last happened to me when I did jury duty too. She changed to plead guilty after we were selected. I remember looking at the defendant very seriously and thinking, well, she hasn't had a lot of opportunities in her life, but what she did is fucked up. Pre-existing medical conditions. We're all going to find out about your prior treatment, moron. Tell your fucking lawyer. I was in a car accident when I was 18. It was my fault, but there was very minimal damage to the lady's car and no one was injured other than whiplash. So I was really confused when I got a summons for a disposition almost a year later. She was suing me for $40k because the accident had her migraines and hurt her shoulder badly enough that she couldn't pick up her disabled son anymore. Both things she'd gotten referrals and had seen a specialist 6 months before the accident. Immediately closed. A postcard. While I was in law school, I worked in a state AG office. Administrative Appeals Division. Guy was appealing a huge tax bill for unpaid tax on his dairy farm's milk production. His entire defense and claimed basis for appeal was that he had zero notice of the requirements to report production, sale and proceeds. In initial disclosures, pile of discovery, was a postcard from the state tax office from when he initially registered to obtain a state tax number. Very smart AAG laid low, sprung it on the guy after he has cemented his position 50 ways to Sunday. Exploded his whole theory, resulting in big judgment. Moral: read your own discovery responses and document production before building your entire theory of the case. One piece of paper can kill your client's position. This lesson has saved my bacon in 27 years of practice for sure. Not a lawyer. Heard about this at a place I volunteer. A guy gets in trouble for illegal dumping by the county. Guy claims that he's been cleaning up other people's litter and he was doing the country's work for them. Then the county brings said litter into evidence and a heap of it is junk mail with guy's name and address on it. Something opposite but worth telling. Years ago, I assisted an attorney whose client was caught in a drug sting operation. After meticulous review of the discovery info received, the officer who typed the arrest report failed to include that defendant, who was charged with possession of controlled substance, ever had possession of controlled substance. Guy was out that same day for time already served. Had a work comp case where a client claimed he fell off the side of his truck while putting a tarp over the load and hurt his back. It seemed legit as he was taken to the hospital and they had given him meds. As we were pursuing the case, it turns out the company had a surveillance camera. The injury seemed fishy to the employer, so they looked at the recording. It turns out the idiot had climbed off the side of the truck, then laid down on the ground and started yelling for help. He had made the whole thing up. No wonder employers question work comp injuries. This guy ruined it for the legitimate claims. Our client was involved in a lawsuit and we managed to get the opposing party to come to the negotiating table to work out a $20 million settlement. This was great news, because they were suing our client for $50 million. We spent months negotiating the details and drafting the settlement agreement. Finally, everything was ready. The parties were set to fly to our offices on Wednesday to sign the documents. They had to be signed in person and during a particular part of the day so that funds could be wired while the banks in two widely separated time zones were both open. On Tuesday, our client called us and told us the deal was off. Why? Because the loan they were using to pay the settlement hadn't come through. Loan that would have been nice to know. They had deliberately hidden the existence of the loan, even from their own lawyers. Not a lawyer yet, but I clerked for a DA's office throughout law school. Obviously we don't have clients, but I'll never forget this kidnapping case I worked on. It involved two Asian male defendants who were both the same age and looked relatively similar. Witness is on the stand and is asked to identify where the defendant who pushed an Uzi into his face is seated. It's clear the witness is having trouble differentiating the defendants. In a true moment of brilliance, one defendant raises his fucking hand and basically points to himself like, right here bud, hands down the dumbest shit I'd ever seen. I thought his defense attorney was going to have a brain aneurysm. Deleted. Client was injured when he slipped on ice in the common parking lot of his multi-family house. Turns out he was the one responsible for clearing the lot. Thanks buddy. Unfair dismissal case. My client claimed to have been unfairly dismissed from her accounting job due to poor performance. Her story was that they were just racist bullies. It turns out that she was running her own private accounting business, with her own clients, at her employer's premises during working hours, using their facilities. Her argument, when confronted with this fact, was that her clients would never have given her employer their business anyway. I actually did get her a small settlement because they didn't follow proper procedure when firing her, which is why I didn't know about the real reason for firing her, but it was peanuts compared to what she would have deserved if her story wasn't bullshit. I was the one being sued for a car accident. I said he ran the red light, he said I did. Went to the deposition and his attorney was asking about his day-to-day activities since the accident. He stated that most days he takes out the trash, watches TV, and smokes crack. Smokes crack. Anyhow, his attorney decided to drop the case for obvious reasons. Never heard another thing about it. I'll fucking do it again. 1. Clients lie all the time. 2. Client lies will always be uncovered in relatively early stages of discovery if the lawyers on both sides are doing their jobs at all. I had a client defraud me into taking her case, and waste months of my time, only for me to discover that she was lying about everything once the opposing side asked for a bunch of discovery and she refused to provide it and started ducking my calls and making excuses. Not me, but my legal studies teacher who used to be a lawyer was representing a woman suing a supermarket for a slip that caused her to hurt her shoulder. She had to tell the court how much it had impacted life and the fact that she couldn't do her everyday tasks. She said, "I can't even lift my arms like this to hang the washing," and proceeded to show the court the exact gesture in perfect form that she was explaining she couldn't do. That was dumb of her to do in court, but I would believe that she could make the gesture briefly but not over and over again. It's like how some people need wheelchairs for distances but can walk a couple feet. Deleted. Wait, her mother's funeral? Fired and wrongly accused of sexually harassing her co-workers at a Christmas party. Turns out she doesn't actually remember the Christmas party because she took an Ambien and was drinking. I've got a friend who had their client leave during recess in court to commit another crime, the same as he was on trial for at the time. She got called to go see him back at the prison when she'd been expecting to see him back in the courtroom. A friend of mine is a lawyer and he said that a client once turned up to court in the actual same outfit he was wearing in the burglary. When the CCTV footage come up in evidence, the client looked down to himself and was like, "Ooh, wash it." Edit, my first ever awards, cheers. I knew today wouldn't be a good day to wear my lucky ski mask. I was involved in a hit and run car accident. My leg was pretty mangled. However, the driver of the car was caught. Turns out he was a rich kid who was driving his mum's convertible Porsche. Denied all knowledge of hitting me, etc. At the trial, the prosecutor asked him how long he had been driving, to which he answered, "Do you mean how long have I been driving legally or illegally?" The judge then went nuts asking why and when he had been driving illegally. His defense team sat down in their chairs and shook their heads. Needless to say, he lost the case. Interestingly, he died a year later by drowning. He had hired speedboat and holiday, flipped it over and drowned. Turns out he was drunk at the time. Karma can be a cunt. I can picture how the kid thinks he's tough by saying the exact same things to his friends, and that reply just become a habit to him anytime anyone asked about him driving.